The words hung in the air like poison. "You're becoming such a burden," my husband Mark sighed as he set down my pain medication with obvious irritation. I froze, my hand halfway to the glass of water on my nightstand. After 15 years of marriage, after nursing him through his own back surgery 3 years earlier, after raising our children together, I was a burden. The surgery that was supposed to fix my chronic pain had left me temporarily dependent on him, and 6 weeks was apparently his breaking point. I said nothing that night. I just swallowed my pills and turned away, tears silently soaking my pillow while he scrolled through his phone beside me, completely oblivious to how deeply his casual cruelty had cut me. That was the moment I knew our marriage was over, though it would be months before I actually left. Before the surgery, I'd been the glue holding our family together. I juggled my job as an elementary school teacher, kept our home running smoothly, and was the emotional support for our 2 teenagers, Emma and Jason. Mark's job in sales kept him traveling, and over the years we'd settled into a routine where he was more like an occasional visitor than a true partner. When my doctor finally convinced me that surgery was necessary for my degenerating disc, a problem I'd been managing with physical therapy and pain medication for years, Mark had seemed supportive. "Of course you should do it," he'd said. "We'll manage." I should have paid attention to that "we'll manage" rather than "I'll take care of you." The difference seems obvious now. The recovery was harder than I had expected. The pain was intense, and I needed help with everything from showering to getting dressed. Emma and Jason tried to help when they weren't at school, but they were 16 and 14. They had their own lives, their own struggles. The bulk of my care fell to Mark, who had taken 2 weeks off work before returning to his regular schedule. At first, he was attentive, if a bit awkward. He'd never been particularly nurturing, but he tried. He made simple meals, helped me to the bathroom, and picked up my prescriptions. But as days stretched into weeks, his patience thinned. The sighs grew louder, the help came with rolling eyes, and eventually, the resentment bubbled over into those 6 devastating words. "You're becoming such a burden." That night, as I lay awake beside my sleeping husband, I made a promise to myself. I would get better, not for him, but for me. And then I would leave. Recovery became my mission. The next morning, I called my sister Claire, who lived 3 hours away. I didn't tell her about Mark's comment, just that I was struggling and needed some support. Within 2 days, she had arranged to work remotely and moved into our guest room. Mark seemed relieved. He returned to his business trips with barely concealed enthusiasm, while Claire helped me with my physical therapy exercises, drove me to doctor appointments, and most importantly, reminded me of who I was beyond my injury. "Remember when we hiked the Appalachian Trail section after your divorce?" she asked one evening as she helped me with my stretches. Before Mark, I'd been briefly married to my college boyfriend, a relationship that had crumbled under the weight of our youth and immaturity. I could barely keep up with you," she continued. "You've always been the strong one, Alexa. This is temporary." With Claire's encouragement, I pushed myself in physical therapy. My therapist, Miguel, noticed the change in my determination. "Whatever's lit this fire in you, keep it burning," he said after I had completed a particularly challenging set of exercises. "But remember, recovery isn't linear. Be patient with yourself." Patience with myself, yes. But my patience with Mark had run out. I didn't confront him about what he'd said. Instead, I watched him with new eyes. I noticed how he spoke to the kids, always a little distracted, a little dismissive of their accomplishments unless they aligned with his interests. I saw how he barely asked about my progress, how he'd changed the subject when I mentioned pain. Most tellingly, I noticed how rarely he touched me anymore. No casual hand on my shoulder. No kiss unless it was perfunctory and public. When had we become such strangers? Had we always been this disconnected? And I'd been too busy keeping everything running to notice? Claire stayed for 3 weeks before her job required her to return to the office. By then, I could move around with just a cane, and the kids had stepped up their help around the house. Emma had taken over much of the cooking, discovering a talent for it that surprised us all. Jason became diligent about yard work and taking out the trash without being asked. "Mom, are you and Dad okay?" Emma asked one evening while we were alone in the kitchen. She was making her specialty, a chicken and vegetable stir-fry that had become our Tuesday tradition. "Why do you ask, honey?" I stirred the rice, avoiding her eyes. "You don't talk anymore, and he's away more than usual." I hadn't realized the kids had noticed. I thought I'd been protecting them by keeping up appearances. "We're just adjusting to this new normal," I said. "It's been hard on everyone." Emma gave me a look that said she wasn't buying it, but she didn't push. My smart, perceptive daughter. She'd always been able to read people better than I could. That conversation with Emma was another turning point. I realized I wasn't just staying for my recovery anymore. I was stalling because I was afraid. Afraid of being on my own. Afraid of breaking up our family. Afraid of admitting that 15 years of my life had culminated in a husband who saw me as nothing more than a burden when times got tough. 2 months after my surgery, I was well enough to return to teaching part-time. My colleagues welcomed me back warmly, and being in my classroom again restored something in me that had been missing. My identity wasn't just wrapped up in being Mark's wife or Emma and Jason's mother. I was Ms. Alexa to dozens of 8-year-olds who lit up when I walked into the room. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Reeves, telling Mark it was to help with the depression that sometimes follows major surgery. In reality, I was planning my exit. "What's stopping you from leaving now?" Dr. Reeves asked during one session, after I'd explained my plan to wait until I was fully recovered. "I need to be strong enough to start over," I said. "You're already stronger than you think," she replied. "But I understand building resources. Just be careful that waiting doesn't become an excuse." She was right to worry. It would have been easy to slip back into old patterns, to tell myself that things weren't so bad, that marriage is about enduring the hard times. Mark had become more pleasant since I'd returned to work, since I no longer needed his help. We existed in a polite détente, orbiting each other without connecting. But I couldn't unhear those words. "You're becoming such a burden." They echoed in my mind every time he smiled absently at dinner, every time he declined family movie night for work calls, every time he slept with his back to me. I made plans quietly and methodically. I started by getting my finances in order. Mark and I had always kept separate accounts along with our joint one. But I opened a new account at a different bank and began transferring small amounts from my teacher's salary. I researched apartments in neighborhoods near my school, places where the kids could still attend their current schools if they chose to split time between us. Physical therapy continued, and I graduated from the cane to walking unassisted, though I still tired easily. I started swimming at the YMCA, rebuilding my strength. Each lap was a stroke toward freedom. 3 months post-surgery, I had lunch with my friend Diane, another teacher who'd gone through a divorce years earlier. "I need advice," I said after we'd settled into our booth at the cafe near school, "about leaving Mark." Her eyebrows shot up. I wondered if something was wrong. "You've been different since coming back, more distant." I told her everything. The burden comment, the years of emotional neglect I'd only recently recognized, my secret preparations. "I'm not surprised," she said finally. "Mark has always struck me as someone who loves the idea of family more than the reality of it." "What do you mean?" "He shows up for the big moments, the Christmas concerts, the award ceremonies, but have you ever seen him at a regular Tuesday night dinner? Or helping with homework? He's like a part-time husband and father." Her words crystallized something I'd felt but couldn't articulate. Mark loved us when it was easy and convenient. When it required sacrifice or discomfort, he checked out. "So you think I'm doing the right thing?" I asked. "I think you already know you are," she said. "But if you're asking for practical advice, document everything, get a good lawyer, and prepare for him to be shocked. Men like Mark never see it coming because they're not paying attention." She was right about that too. Mark wasn't paying attention to the new clothes I'd bought, slightly more professional, slightly more confident than my old wardrobe. He didn't notice that I'd reconnected with old friends or that I'd started wearing makeup again, even on days I wasn't teaching. He didn't question why I was meeting with our financial advisor or why I'd taken a sudden interest in our investment accounts. For months after surgery, I was nearly back to my old self physically. The kids had adjusted to our new normal. Emma cooking twice a week, Jason handling more chores, both of them checking in on me with a maturity that made my heart ache. They'd stepped up beautifully. Mark, not so much. He'd reverted to his pre-surgery behavior. Frequent business trips, distracted conversations, falling asleep on the couch most nights. The brief attentiveness he'd shown when I first returned to work had faded as soon as he realized I was self-sufficient again. I found the apartment in early spring. A sunny 2-bedroom in a complex with a pool, just 10 minutes from my school and 15 from the kids' high school. The leasing agent, a kind woman named Tara, didn't ask questions when I explained I needed flexibility on the move-in date. "The unit will be ready whenever you are," she assured me. "Just give me a week's notice." I signed the lease on a Tuesday afternoon. That night, Mark actually made it home for dinner. Emma had cooked lasagna, and the 4 of us sat around the table almost like a normal family. "This is delicious, Mark said, helping himself to seconds. "You're getting really good at this." "Thanks, Dad," Emma beamed. "I was thinking maybe I could take some proper cooking classes this summer. There's a program at the community center." "That sounds expensive," he frowned. "Let's talk about it later." I saw Emma's face fall and felt a surge of protective anger. "I think it's a great idea," I said. "I'll look into it tomorrow." Mark gave me a look, the one that said I was undermining him, but I just smiled and changed the subject. After dinner, as the kids cleared the table, Mark surprised me by saying, "Let's go for a walk. It's nice out and you could use the exercise." 6 months ago, I might have been hurt by the casual comment about my need for exercise. Now, I just noted it as another example of his thoughtlessness. We walked around the neighborhood in the soft spring evening. Mark talking about an upcoming sales conference, me making appropriate noises of interest, while mentally cataloging what I still needed to pack. "You seem distant lately," he said suddenly, as we rounded the corner back to our street. For a moment, I considered telling him everything. How his words had broken something irreparable in me. How I'd been planning my escape for months. How I'd signed a lease that very day. But what would be the point? He'd either try to talk me out of it or, worse, agree that we should end things. I wasn't ready for either conversation. "Just tired," I said. "End of the school year is always hectic." He nodded, apparently satisfied with my explanation, and we walked the rest of the way in silence. That night, as I lay awake beside him, I thought about the day I would finally leave. I had it all planned out. I would wait until he was on a business trip, move my essentials to the new apartment, and leave a letter explaining that the kids knew where to find me and that my lawyer would be in touch. It would be clean, decisive, and on my terms. No dramatic confrontation. No chance for him to make me doubt myself. Just me, finally choosing my own happiness after years of settling for scraps of attention. The next morning, I woke up before Mark and stood at the bedroom window, watching the sunrise paint the sky pink and gold. In a few weeks, I would be watching a different sunrise from a different window. The thought filled me with equal parts terror and exhilaration. My phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "How are you doing, sis? Still on track?" I typed back to set the date. 3 weeks from today while he's in Chicago. Her response came immediately. "So proud of you. Call me anytime. Love you." I tucked the phone away as I heard Mark stirring. 3 more weeks of pretending everything was normal. 3 more weeks until I would no longer be anyone's burden. Those 3 weeks were the strangest of my life. Each day was split between 2 realities, the life I was pretending to live and the one I was secretly building. I taught my 3rd graders, attended Jason's baseball games, and nodded along to Mark's dinner conversations, all while mentally cataloging what to take and what to leave behind. I told the kids 2 weeks before my planned departure. I debated waiting until after I'd moved. but they deserved better than coming home to find me gone. We sat in Emma's room, the three of us cross-legged on her bed like we used to do for story time when they were little. "I need to tell you something important," I began, my heart pounding. "I've decided to leave Dad. I found an apartment, and I'm moving out while he's in Chicago." Silence. Jason stared at his hands. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Is it because of what he said about you being a burden?" Emma asked quietly. My breath caught. "You heard that?" She nodded. "I was getting water that night. I heard everything. Why didn't you say anything?" "I thought maybe you'd work it out." She wiped a tear. "But you haven't been the same since. Neither has he. My perceptive girl, always watching, always understanding more than I gave her credit for. It's not just that one comment," I explained. "It's what it revealed. Dad and I have been growing apart for years, and my surgery just made it impossible to ignore anymore." "Are you getting divorced?" Jason finally spoke, his voice small. "Eventually, yes. But right now, I'm just moving out. You'll both still see Dad regularly, and you can spend as much time with me as you want. My apartment has rooms for both of you." "Where is it?" Jason asked. "Near Lincoln Park. 10 minutes from school. Close to both your schools." "Can we see it?" Emma's practical question grounded me. "Yes. Tomorrow after school? I have the keys." They both nodded, and we spent the next hour talking through logistics. They could split time however they wanted. Yes, they could leave clothes and belongings at both places. No, they didn't have to choose sides. Yes, I was sure this was what I wanted. I didn't tell them how Mark's words had carved themselves into my heart, how the pain of his rejection had overshadowed even the physical agony of my recovery. They didn't need to carry that. They just needed to know they were loved, wanted, and never, ever a burden. The next day, I showed them the apartment. It was small compared to our house, but filled with afternoon sunlight. The leasing office had given me permission to start moving things in gradually, so I'd already brought over some basics: a new coffee maker, fresh towels, family photos in new frames. "This is your room," I told Emma, showing her the larger bedroom I'd painted a soft sage green, her favorite color. "And Jason, you're here." His room was still mostly empty, but had a desk by the window with a view of the pool. "You did all this while we were at school." Emma ran her hand along the new comforter on her bed, and on weekends when Dad was traveling, Claire and Diane helped. Jason wandered around, hands in his pockets. "Does Dad know about any of this?" "Not yet. I'll leave him a letter explaining everything." "He's going to freak out," Jason said, but there was no judgment in his voice, just a statement of fact. Probably I agreed, but this isn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. I've been planning for months. "Since the surgery," Emma said. "Since the surgery," I confirmed. "We ordered pizza and ate it on the floor of the empty living room, making plans for furniture we'd need and how we'd decorate. By the time we left, both kids seemed cautiously optimistic. They'd have questions later, I knew. Doubts would creep in. But for now, they understood I wasn't abandoning them. I was creating a new home where they would always be welcome. The week before Mark's Chicago trip was tense. Not because he suspected anything, but because my own emotions were so close to the surface. Every small irritation. His dirty socks on the floor, his half listening to Emma's stories, his forgotten promise to fix the leaky faucet, threatened to make me explode with 5 months of pent-up resentment. I'd been so focused on the logistics of leaving that I hadn't fully processed how angry I was. Not just about that one comment, but about years of feeling secondary in my own marriage. Years of managing everything while he built his career. Years of making excuses for his absences, both physical and emotional. Dr. Reeves helped me channel that anger during our last session before the move. "Write it all down," she suggested. "Everything you're feeling. Then decide what parts, if any, belong in your letter to Mark." That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table and filled 12 pages of my journal. I wrote about the early days of our marriage, when his ambition had seemed exciting rather than exclusionary. I wrote about the gradual shift after the kids were born, how he'd stepped back from parenting in tiny increments until he was barely involved. I wrote about the surgery, about needing him and discovering he wasn't capable of giving what I needed. And yes, I wrote about those 6 words that had changed everything. When I was done, I felt lighter. Most of what I'd written would never make it into my letter to Mark. It was, for me, a purging of emotions I'd suppressed for too long. The day before Mark left for Chicago, I had a final checkup with my surgeon, Dr. Lin. "The fusion looks excellent," she said, reviewing my latest scans. "You've made remarkable progress. Most patients take much longer to get back to full activity." "I had good motivation," I said. She studied me over her glasses. "Whatever works. Just don't push too hard. You've still got at least a month before I'd clear you for anything strenuous." I thought about the boxes I still needed to pack, the furniture I needed to move. Understood. After the appointment, I met Claire for lunch. She'd driven in to help with the final moving push and would stay with me for the first few days in the new apartment. "Everything's set?" she asked as we settled into our booth. "Almost. The kids know, and they've seen the place. I've packed most of my clothes and personal items. Just need to finish packing my office and move the last boxes tomorrow. How are you feeling?" I considered the question. Ready. Scared. Relieved. Guilty. I played with my napkin. The kids are handling it better than I expected, but it's still going to be hard for them. "You're not responsible for Mark's failures," Claire said firmly. "You gave that marriage everything you had. The kids know that." That night, Mark packed for his trip with his usual efficiency. 3 nearly identical suits, ties rolled neatly, toiletry bag ready by the door. I watched from the bed, wondering if he noticed anything different about the room. The empty spaces on my bookshelves, the gaps in my closet, the missing photos from my nightstand. If he did, he didn't mention it. "I should be back Thursday evening," he said, zipping his suitcase. "The Jacobson pitch is Wednesday, so assuming that goes well, I might take the team out after." "Good luck with the pitch," I said automatically, the same words I'd offered before countless business trips. He paused, looking at me oddly. "Thanks. You okay? You seem quiet." Here it was, my opening to tell him everything, to have the conversation in person rather than through a letter. But looking at him standing there, already mentally checked out, and in Chicago, I knew nothing would change. He'd argue or apologize or promise to do better, but the fundamental truth would remain. When I needed him most, he'd seen me as a burden. "Just tired," I said. "End of year testing starts tomorrow." He nodded, satisfied with my explanation, and continued his packing routine. The next morning was typical Mark. Early alarm, efficient shower, coffee in a travel mug. He kissed me goodbye distractedly, ruffled Jason's hair at the breakfast table, and called a generic goodbye to Emma, who was still in the bathroom. "See you Thursday," he said, and then he was gone. The sound of his car pulling away from the curb released something in me. I took a deep breath, my first truly free breath in months. "Is this it?" Emma asked, appearing in the kitchen doorway, already dressed for school. "Is he gone?" I nodded. "This is it." Jason looked up from his cereal. "So we're doing this today?" "Yes. Aunt Claire will be here in an hour. I'll drop you both at school. Then we'll move the last of my things. I should be settled in by the time you're done with practice." They both nodded, solemn and supportive in a way that made my heart ache. They'd grown up so much in the past few months, partly because of my surgery, and partly because of the quiet fracturing of their family. "It's going to be okay," I promised, gathering them both into a hug. Different, but okay. Claire arrived with coffee and determination. Together, we loaded the last of my boxes into her SUV and my car. The house looked barely different. I'd taken only what was unquestionably mine, leaving the shared furniture, the kitchen fully stocked, the living areas intact. An outsider would never guess someone had moved out. The letter to Mark sat on the kitchen counter, propped against the coffee maker where he'd be sure to see it. 3 pages, carefully edited from my 12-page journal rant. It explained that I was leaving, that the kids knew where I was, and that my lawyer would be in touch about next steps. I detailed the custody arrangement I proposed and my expectations for co-parenting. But mostly I told him why, not just the burden comment, but the years of emotional distance that had preceded it. I deserved to be more than an afterthought, I'd written at the end. So do Emma and Jason. I hope you'll use this as an opportunity to become the father they need, even if you couldn't be the husband I needed. By noon, the last box was in my new apartment. Claire and I spent the afternoon unpacking, arranging furniture that had been delivered that morning, and making the space feel like home. We hung curtains, filled bookshelves, and made both kids' beds with new linens. You really did it, Claire said as we collapsed onto my new couch, surveying our work. I really did. She squeezed my hand. Mom and Dad would be proud. They always thought you settled. I looked at her, surprised. They never said that. Of course not. They wouldn't. But I remember Mom asking me once if you were really happy, and Dad saying Mark reminded him of Uncle Steve. Uncle Steve, our father's brother, who'd been married 4 times and never seemed to understand why his relationships failed. Why didn't you ever say anything? I asked. Claire shrugged. Would you have listened? You were determined to make it work, especially after the kids came along. You needed to reach your own breaking point. She was right. If she'd voiced concerns earlier, I would have defended Mark, defended my choices. I needed to see for myself what everyone else had apparently seen for years. The kids arrived after their activities, Jason from baseball practice and Emma from debate club. They wandered through the apartment, touching things, testing out the new furniture. Where should I put my stuff? Jason asked, holding his backpack awkwardly. Your room has a desk for homework, and I cleared space in the closet for whatever you want to leave here, I told him. Can I stay tonight? Emma asked suddenly. I packed a bag just in case. I hadn't expected either of them to want to stay immediately. I'd assumed they'd need time to adjust to the idea. Of course, I said. Jason, what about you? He hesitated. Maybe tomorrow? I didn't bring anything, and I have an early practice. That's fine. Whenever you're ready. We ordered takeout again and ate around the small dining table Claire had helped me find at a consignment store. It wasn't our usual Tuesday meal. No homemade stir-fry from Emma tonight, but it felt right for our first evening in the new space. When will Dad get home? Jason asked as we cleaned up. Thursday evening, I said. He'll probably call you both tomorrow when he sees my letter. What if he comes here? Emma's brow furrowed. He doesn't know where here is yet, I reminded her. I'll tell him when he's had time to process things, but for now this is our space. Neither child seemed particularly worried about Mark's reaction, which told me more about their relationship with him than any conversation could have. They knew, as I did, that his initial response would be anger and indignation, not heartbreak. He'd be upset about the disruption, the blow to his ego, not the loss of daily life with his family. That evening, after Claire had gone to her hotel and the kids were settled, Emma in her new room, Jason back at the house with a promise to call in the morning, I sat on my small balcony and watched the stars come out. My back ached from the day's activities, but it was a normal ache, not the debilitating pain that had sent me to surgery in the first place. Physical therapy had made me stronger than I'd been before the operation. My phone buzzed with a text from Diane. All moved in? Need anything? All set, I replied. First night in the new place. Emma's staying over. How does it feel? I considered the question, looking around at my small balcony with its potted plants, another new addition to my life. How did it feel to walk away from 15 years of marriage? To rebuild my life from scratch at 42? Like I can breathe again, I texted back. The next day passed in a bubble of normalcy. I taught my class, attended a faculty meeting, and picked up groceries on the way home. Emma had decided to stay another night, and Jason was coming over for dinner. They'd both texted with Mark during the day. Routine check-ins that gave no indication he'd discovered my absence yet. It was strange, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I jumped every time my phone rang, expecting Mark's name to flash on the screen. But the day passed, and then another, with no word from him. Thursday arrived, the day of his return. I'd taken the day off work, not sure what to expect. Would he call, rage at me over the phone? Would he somehow find my address and show up at the door? Or would he do what he'd always done and minimize the problem, assume I'd cool off and come back? The kids had decided to be with me when he got home, a united front I hadn't asked for, but was deeply touched by. Emma hadn't returned to the house at all, and Jason had packed a bag and come to the apartment the previous night. He lands at 4:30, Jason said, checking the flight tracker on his phone. Should be home by 6 o'clock if traffic isn't bad. We ordered pizza and tried to distract ourselves with a movie, but by 6:30, all three of us were checking our phones obsessively. At 7:12, Emma's phone rang. Mark's face filled the screen. She answered, putting it on speaker. "Hi, Dad." "Emma, where are you and Jason?" "I'm home and no one's here. There's a letter from your mother, but I assume this is some kind of joke." His voice was tight, controlled anger vibrating beneath the surface. "We're with Mom at her new apartment," Emma said calmly. "New apartment? What the hell is going on? Put your mother on." Emma looked at me, questioning. I nodded and reached for the phone. "Hello, Mark." A beat of silence. "Alexa, what is this? You moved out while I was gone? Took the kids? What kind of stunt are you pulling?" "It's not a stunt," I said evenly. "The letter explains everything. I've left. The kids are with me tonight, but they'll spend time with you too. We'll work out a schedule." "This is ridiculous. You can't just leave." "I already have." "Because of one comment?" "I was tired, Alexa. You know I didn't mean it. If this is about the surgery—" "It's about a lot more than that," I interrupted. "The surgery just made it impossible to ignore anymore. We haven't been partners for years, Mark." "So you just walk out? 15 years of marriage, and you don't even have the courage to tell me to my face." That stung because there was truth in it, but I'd made my choice. I told you in the letter. I'm not coming back, Mark. We can talk about the details once you've had time to process this, but my decision is final. He was quiet for a moment, and I could picture him perfectly, standing in our kitchen, one hand gripping the counter, jaw clenched the way it did when a client backed out of a deal. "Let me talk to the kids again," he finally said. I passed the phone back to Emma, who took it off speaker and talked to him quietly for a few minutes before handing it to Jason. They both assured him they were fine, that they'd see him tomorrow after school, that this wasn't about him. Later, after they'd gone to bed, my phone lit up with a text from Mark. "This isn't over. We need to talk." But it was over. The burden he hadn't wanted to carry had walked away, stronger than before. In the darkness of my new bedroom, I whispered the words I'd been holding back for months. I am not a burden. I never was. And finally I believed it.